Hello everyone, welcome to Astro Psych, and on this channel I usually just kind of talk about whatever I've recently been interested in, whatever I've been thinking about, these sorts of things. And I've recently been reading a book on Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism, and I wanted to talk about some of the things that I thought were interesting in this book that I've been reading. And one of the things that stood out to me the most, and of course this is kind of one of the core tenets of Buddhism in terms of philosophy, is finding the roots of your problems, although they use the word suffering. And I think in psychology and mental health and therapy, this is actually something that they teach as well, and that's what the goal of a psychologist or therapist is a lot of the time, is to help someone find the root of their problem so that they can work on it. But I do think if we view our own problems through the right framework, we can approach them in such a way that maybe we don't always even need to have some sort of mental health professional to help us with it. And I wanted to talk about some of the things that I've gleaned from this book and this particular topic of finding the roots of your problems. Let's get into it. Now, I am by no means a professional on Buddhist philosophy, but even as someone who's just kind of a novice and been reading in this stuff casually, I think that there's some interesting things that can be gleaned and some insight that we can take away from these teachings and interesting topics that are being discussed in the philosophies and books that I've been reading. Now, one of the core tenets of Buddhism in terms of their philosophy is the Four Noble Truths. And this revolves around the idea of, one, that there is suffering within the world and that almost all things are suffering or include some sort of portion of suffering within them. Two is that there is a beginning or cause to this suffering and that we can recognize what this cause is, what this cause to suffering is. The third is that there can be an end to this suffering, the cessation of suffering. And by understanding that there is suffering and that there is a root of suffering, we can begin to attempt to move towards the cessation or end of suffering. And then finally, we can find our path towards well-being by essentially doing the opposite of suffering or bringing about the right ways of action, thinking, and perception towards the world, essentially acting and thinking in the correct ways that will help us move away from suffering and towards well-being. Now, as a student of psychology, this was really interesting to read about and learn about because a lot of these things, even if they're not one-to-one correlated with psychology, essentially get to the same source that psychology does, the same answer or conclusion when it comes to trying to help people through the issues or things that they're talking about. I mean, if you go to a psychotherapist, if you go to a mental health professional, a lot of the times they're going to be attempting to help you reframe your own perceptions, reframe your own way of thinking so that you can understand the root of the problem that you're facing. And I think the root of the problem that people are facing is one of the things that if we really start to look for and understand, that is what's going to help us the most get out of our issues. A lot of the times when we're moving through life, when we're trying to fix a problem, when we're trying to fix ourselves, we're dealing with the symptoms of the issue that we're facing and not the issue in and of itself. So to give an example of this, if you had a dehydration headache, so say you hadn't drank water for a few hours and you had a headache, if you take an Advil, your headache will go away, but you're still going to be thirsty and an hour later the headache's going to come back. This is the same way that we as humans tend to treat our problems when we don't fully understand where the root of the problem is. We're going to be attempting to deal with the symptom, the headache, instead of the root of the problem or the suffering, which is the dehydration in this case. One of the reasons I personally have been very drawn and interested in these kind of Eastern philosophies over the past few weeks is I find that they very much speak and teach in images and metaphors, and that almost all of the teachings that they have are accompanied by some sort of analogy or metaphor that brings very easy mental imagery into my mind and allows me to fully understand the concept much quicker through those lenses. And one of the ways in which they discuss the roots of problems and how problems come to arise is that understanding that you can never really kind of 100% get rid of a problem. As in, even if you destroy the kind of root of the suffering, the seed of the suffering is still going to be there. And we have to recognize that sometimes we can water this seed with bad water or with bad faith or with bad actions, but we can also keep this seed from being watered by doing things that are going to be more correct or going to be more in line with who we are or the right way of thinking, perception, speech, these sorts of things. So imagine in yourself, every part of your personality is kind of a seed within you, and you can choose to water it or not to water it. If you have a seed of anger, if there's a seed of anger within you and it's very small, if you begin to water it and it grows into a flower and then a tree, eventually you're going to find yourself getting more angry and angry and angry. But the more you begin to focus on not being angry or trying to control your anger, the more that this tree might revert back to a flower, might revert back to a seed, and you can keep it in that seed form where it's not going to cause trouble unless you begin to water it again. But the same applies also to the positive things in our life, where the positive things in our life are a seed within us that need to be nurtured and watered. And a lot of the times when we're trying to fix some sort of negative problem, we'll attempt to maybe cut down the tree of a negative issue while ignoring the watering of the ones that are important or healthy for us. And a lot of the times we can find that if you have 10 good trees and one bad tree, and you have 10 really healthy trees surrounding that one bad tree, that one bad tree might eventually just kind of go away into nothingness. It might shrink back on its own. You have to build a forest of positivity around the negative tree, and then you might be able to find that your mental health or performance overall will get better. The general concept there is that we should make sure that we are recognizing that there is going to be suffering and that our problems are going to come and get us if we don't understand and recognize the roots of those issues, but we also need to learn to recognize the importance of the good things that we usually don't take account for, the things that we're typically ignoring that are relatively good within us. Now, the book uses the example, it gives quite a few, but it uses the example that we don't realize how much we enjoy having two working legs until one of them is broken or doesn't work anymore. And that's kind of the general philosophy and idea there, is that a lot of the times we take for granted the positive things in our life and we forget to enjoy these things, and therefore it becomes so much more easy for suffering to creep into our life because we're not paying attention or being grateful for the things that are good within our life. You know, it's like when you have a cold, you don't recognize how much you miss being able to breathe through your nose until you don't have that ability anymore. That's the general idea of what they're talking about here. You should be thankful and try to focus on these things in your life that are positive and be aware of the things in your life that are really going to help you move you forward and that are going to essentially just help you be a better you. And while you do want to be aware of the negative things as well, you just need to make sure that you are occasionally taking into account the good things that you have. And you might find that you have this huge negative tree in your life that you want to cut down and you want to bring it down back to a seed, but maybe you actually do have lots of other positive trees surrounding that. Maybe you have a forest of positivity. You just don't recognize they're even there yet. And if you can begin to put yourself into a point of view or a perspective where you can start to see and understand these things are positive, they might appear in your forest of personality, and maybe you'll find that eventually the positivity can outweigh the negativity and you can become a better you. So you've recognized that there's a problem or you're experiencing some sort of suffering within you. The question is now, how do you go about stopping it? Well, the Buddhist teaching for this is very, very long, and I'm not going to go through the huge amount of work that it is to attempt to overcome a problem and move towards a better self. But I will give you one example of a small step that you can take to kind of begin to understand the process of how you might be struggling with something or how you can begin to recognize the struggle that you're having. Let's say you're experiencing some sort of negative emotion or negative experience in your life. The meditation practice that they use, the mindfulness practice that they use is very simple, but it's very helpful as well. And it's something that I've actually been doing for many years before I even attempted or even understood Buddhism. And it's the idea of stop, calm, think. If you're presented with a problem or a frustration or a negative emotion, stop yourself. Stop yourself from acting immediately on the action or emotion that you're feeling right now, whatever it is. You know, if you're angry at your partner and you want to yell at them or do something, stop yourself and realize, hey, wait, this isn't who I normally am. Then you go into the process of calming yourself. Now that you've stopped yourself from acting in the wrong way based on the thing that you're doing right now, maybe it's a negative habit you have. Maybe you find that you're overeating. Maybe you're doing something that you are ashamed that you are doing. First, stop yourself, then calm yourself and realize that it's okay to make mistakes, or it's okay to be someone who isn't perfect. As humans, we are typically imperfect people, and that is completely okay. There's no shame in that. You have to recognize that it's normal, but then you have to ask, well, what am I going to do about that? So you stop yourself from acting on the emotion, you calm yourself, you recognize where this problem is coming from within you, how can you begin to understand it, and then you rest on that. You rest on the issue that you're facing, and once you've stopped yourself, calmed yourself, and then rested on it, you're going to find that you're more likely to have a better perspective or understanding of that issue, especially if you stop yourself before you've done real damage. You know, if you start to get angry or frustrated at someone and you pull yourself out of that state consciously, you take the full conscious effort it takes to remove yourself from that negative situation, then you calm yourself and then you rest on it, you're really going to find that wow, I have more control over myself than I thought, or I have the ability to stop this negative part of me. And if I continuously do what I did in that situation, this negative tree, this seed of negativity is eventually going to dwindle down, and I'll have better control over myself, and I'll be able to better interact with those who are important to me. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of divergent topic here on the channel. Let me know if you enjoyed this discussion. This is kind of psychology adjacent, essentially, philosophy, but I think this is really interesting, and I actually might do more videos on the kind of philosophies that I'm reading about here in the next few weeks. I've always, I'm always trying to switch up what I want to do on the channel anyway. I'm finding new things that interest me. So let me know down in the comment section below. Did you enjoy this? Do you think that this is useful or practical advice? Do you think that this is a good way of understanding problems or how we might face problems within our life? If you do, let me know. Other than that, I would like to remind people that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asurpsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This is Mr. from Asur Psych. Have a good one.